Hello and welcome to the India Story. I'm Vikram Chandra. This is the show where we decode top stories coming from India and the implications for the world and the global audience. This week on the program, Khalistani posters directly threatening India and Indian diplomats have led to a storm. Clearly, this isn't something that can be covered by free speech. And even the British and the Canadians have had to speak out against the threats. But the Indian government has also made it very clear that words are fine, but we expect action. And we definitely need protection for Indian diplomats and diplomatic missions around the world. The sort of direct and indirect attacks and threats that we are seeing are clearly unacceptable. So we're going to take a look at that story. But also one of our big focuses this week is on the SCO meeting, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, which seems somewhat muted, which is not entirely surprising given the composition of the grouping. With China and Pakistan both in the SCO, as is Russia and now Iran, India clearly has to walk a tightrope, which has also left some analysts wondering what lies ahead for the SCO and what does India actually gain from the SCO? To answer these questions, we have two top guests on the program tonight. Seasoned political commentator Dr. Brahma Chelani and a former ambassador to China, Ashok Kanta, both on the program. Also on this show, we're going to be discussing the record high that we are seeing in the Indian stock markets. What are the reasons behind this surge and will the trend continue? We are being joined by two of the top market experts, Sameer Arora, the founder and fund manager of Helios Capital, and also Feroz Aziz, Deputy CEO of Anand Rathi Private Wealth Management. Both are joining us and telling us what's going to happen in the markets coming up. And we have a special interview lined up with our Newsmaker of the week, Sunil Chhetri, probably the greatest footballer India has ever produced, the captain of India, the man who led his team to a record 9th win at the SAF Games this week. All of those stories coming up for you. But let's first take a very quick look at the major headlines. The Gujarat High Court has rejected an appeal by opposition leader Rahul Gandhi to suspend his conviction in a defamation case, quashing for now his hope of returning to Parliament and also contesting national elections that are due next year. India's premier engineering institute is going global. The first IIT campus outside the country will come up in Tanzania's Zanzibar. An agreement has been inked in the presence of External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and Zanzibar's President Hussein Ali Mwinyi. IIT Madras will oversee academic courses, curriculum and student selection. India's Space Research Organization is gearing up to launch its lunar mission Chandrayaan-3 next week. India's third lunar endeavor aims to achieve a historic moon landing and has been developed at a cost of something like 615 crore. It will hopefully place India in an exclusive club of the United States, Soviet Union and China, which have all successfully landed their spacecraft on the moon. And before we turn to the SCO meeting, I do want to talk about the growing menace of a surge in anti-India sentiments fueled by Khalistani extremists in the UK, the US and Canada. Now, anti-India sentiments are one thing. Having protests are also one thing. Yes, if you're standing up there with a poster in your hand and you are saying whatever you want to, it could be covered under the freedom of speech. But what is not acceptable, and it's been made very clear both by the Indian government and frankly even by the host nations, what is not acceptable is the sort of direct and indirect, frankly, violence that we are seeing against Indian high commissions, against Indian consulates. We saw that in London, we've seen that in the United States. We're seeing direct threats being made against Indian diplomats, Kill India posters with the pictures of Indian diplomats on them. This is not acceptable. This is not free speech. This is an incitement to violence. and it is an incitement to violence against diplomats. This is also prohibited by the Vienna Convention and under all forms of international law. Any violence, such as the violence that we are seeing in these images, the attack, for example, on the Indian High Commission that we saw a few months ago, this is not acceptable behavior anyway, and that is why direct action is required. Now, for this very program, for the India story, I had spoken to the Indian High Commissioner to the UK, Vikram Swami, who also finds himself on a couple of those posters. That was done about a month ago, and a month ago, just after the attack on the Indian mission in London. He was clearly undeterred by the attack when I spoke to him. He showed us where exactly that attack had taken place, and he did say that he and his colleagues are taking their role of representing India around the globe seriously, but also indicating that security needs to be provided. Let me just play for you an excerpt of that interview that I had done with the Indian High Commissioner to UK, Vikram Swami, a month ago.
The Indian flag is why we are here, and we have no desire to allow people to sort of push us into a position where we can't even fly the flag. I mean, what else is a diplomatic mission for if it doesn't fly the flag?
And that's why I guess it's a question that we have to ask. The Indian government's already asking it. If you take a look at the security around India House and Aldwych, for example, it's clear that the security is still not what it could be in case extremist elements want to make another attack. They may well be able to do that, and that's why security needs to be provided. But it's not just in London. Exactly that same security has to be provided by the host nations to Indian missions everywhere on the planet. The sort of scenes that we've seen in San Francisco and in America are also unacceptable. And all of this is particularly relevant now because in the last few days, online posters have surfaced calling for rallies at Indian missions in the UK and Canada. Radicalized posters display Indian diplomats as what are described in the posters as murderers of Khalistani movement leaders, the leaders who passed away recently. Now, the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi has said that India has raised the issue of threats to Indian diplomats in London, but it will judge the UK authorities only by what actually happens on the ground, the point we were making a couple of minutes ago. Now, conspiracy theorists apart on who are actually behind the deaths of Khalistani activists around the world, it has to be said that that security is something that must be taken very, very seriously. The more pertinent point that we are going to be now asking are our missions and staff around the world safe? The Canadian Prime Minister and the UK Foreign Secretary have both said violators of peace will be punished and that such attacks are unacceptable. But what's the actual situation on the ground and the perception on the ground? Are stricter actions needed from countries like the Canada or the USA or the UK to preserve their freedom of speech? Fine. But also to look after the security of Indian diplomats globally. This is a theme we're going to keep coming back to. It is an important question, and we will continue to look at it on this program and other programs in the coming weeks. But let's now move to our big focus this particular week on the India story, which is the meeting of the SCO. We're only halfway into 2023, and yet it could be called the year when India seemed to steal a lot of the international spotlight. We have the presidency of the G20 and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization of the SCO. Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently made a trip to America, which can be called historic without the risk of exaggeration. Now, one of the big events in the packed international calendar was the SCO summit, which India hosted this week. Now, it was supposed to have been an in-person meeting, but was converted into a virtual session. So we had the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and the Russian President Vladimir Putin all sitting on a video call when Prime Minister Modi said this.
कुछ देश क्रॉस बॉर्डर टेररिज्म को अपनी नीतियों के इंस्ट्रूमेंट के रूप में इस्तेमाल करते हैं, आतंकवादियों को पनाह देते हैं। एससीओ को ऐसे देशों की आलोचना में कोई संकोच नहीं करना चाहिए।
But despite these strong messages, India shouldn't really be expecting too much from the SCO. That's at least what the analysts are saying. And here are a few reasons why. On terrorism, pressure on Pakistan at the SCO is unlikely since China dominates the grouping, and we know whom China supports. Even at the United Nations, China has frequently blocked the blacklisting of Pakistani-based terrorists. The most serious terrorists get away because Beijing blocks those. Even recently, in June, Beijing blocked UN sanctions on 2611 conspirator Sajid Mir. On the issue of territory, India also cuts a somewhat lonely figure since most of the other SCO members are part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. In the joint statement issued after the Delhi summit, all members endorsed the BRI except for India. Criticism of the initiative is also unlikely since China uses debt diplomacy to trap participants. Finally, Russia, India's potential strong ally at the SCO, is right now a somewhat weakened country, somewhat dependent on China. So it is unlikely to be able to push for India's interests at the SCO as much as it once could. Western sanctions on Moscow over the Ukraine have made it increasingly dependent on Beijing, and that's not going to change very soon. Also, the recent mutiny by the Wagner Group has put Vladimir Putin's authority on somewhat shaky ground. When people say, should India stay on the SCO or not, and that is a question we're going to be debating with top experts in just a couple of minutes, one of the questions that also has to be asked is, what are the alternatives? Well, some people would say the G20. The highlight of this year is the G20 summit in September, for which world leaders are going to be visiting India. But even the United Nations ineffective, can G20 really be a better platform? A platform that New Delhi can use to exert some control over China and Pakistan and what's happening in the world. Now, India could try, but frankly, there are some other questions around the G20 also. Well, some people say that a better option for India to start exerting a bigger influence on the goings-on in the world could be the BRICS group. Now, BRICS includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But some changes being planned in the grouping could make it a really good opportunity for India. You see, a BRICS summit is scheduled in August in South Africa, a month before G20. Leaders are expected to discuss the expansion of the group with the addition of more members. More than 20 countries reportedly want to become BRICS members, and there are 5 likely frontrunners. Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, UAE, Egypt, and Argentina are set to be in the lead. With even China apparently keen on expanding BRICS, India and Brazil, however, are somewhat apprehensive as to what China is going to want to do. It is possible that China may want yet another subservient grouping to push its own agenda and to counter the West. However, this could also be an opportunity for India to take advantage and create a grouping more of its liking. BRICS already represents 43% of the world's population and 30% of the global economy. An expanded BRICS, which works in India's favor, could give New Delhi a greater heft in international matters. Now, the challenge here, of course, will be outsmarting China. Let's face it, the Chinese GDP is bigger than the other 4 members of BRICS put together. And with such deep pockets, Beijing sometimes finds it much easier to do forum shopping and to push its own agenda. But Delhi can also try and push its case by pointing out to candidate countries that China never offers free lunches. Like with the BRI, a partnership with Delhi can sometimes be far more egalitarian and far more fruitful for all sides. But those discussions around the G20 and around BRICS are a little bit in the future. And I promise you, we will be discussing them at great length right here on the India Story. But for the moment, let's turn our attention back to the SCO. Is it still relevant? Should India be part of it at all? How does India outsmart countries like China and Pakistan at the SCO? Great pleasure now to be joined by strategic thinker and top policy maker Brahma Chelani, an author and columnist, joining us on all of that. Brahma, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you joining us on the show. Just wanted to get your sense of the SCO. How do you see this particular grouping, especially given China's heft and the presence, of course, of countries like Pakistan in the SCO?
Look at the New Delhi Declaration, which has emerged from the SCO summit. It is heavy on pious but empty commitments by heads of state, heads of government. Example, it talks about member states being committed to respecting territorial integrity and sovereignty, to abjuring threat or use of force. And the irony is that all this is being said in a declaration of a summit that includes India and China that are locked in a military standoff for more than 3 years because China has disregarded all these principles. It's not only threatening the use of force, actually is employing force to change the territorial status quo in Ladakh.
Yeah, but China is only one part of those contradictions. There are other contradictions. You had Pakistan sitting out there while declarations are being made about terrorism. I mean, what greater irony could be there than that? For example, talk about not invading other people's territory was being said. Beijing was sitting there. China was sitting there. Vladimir Putin was actually sitting there and listening to all of this. So, yeah, I mean, let's face it, some of the countries who are members of the SCO aren't necessarily abiding by any of these principles when it comes to themselves.
In fact, several of the member states of the SCO openly flout international norms and international law. Their foreign policy for long has refused to respect international law and international rules. And this is the problem with the SCO. If you look at the composition of the SCO, now it has 9 members with the addition of Iran. India is the only established democracy in the SCO. If India was not a member of the SCO would be seen as an anti-Western club of autocracies. And this has been reinforced by the addition of Iran as a new SCO member. America's main enemies, China, Russia, and Iran, are all members of the SCO. So India's membership helps to lend respectability to the SCO. It also helps to blunt the labeling of the SCO as an anti-Western grouping. So India brings tangible benefits to the SCO. The question is, what does India get in return from being a member of the SCO? In fact, the SCO hardly meshes with India's interests. You begin with the very name of it, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In other words, the very name bears China's imprint. The initiative was conceived by China in 2001, and China increasingly dominates the SCO. It uses the SCO to advance its commercial and strategic interests. And because Western policy has pushed Russia toward China, Russia also values the SCO to cement its partnership with China. The SCO includes both of India's regional adversaries, China and Pakistan. In fact, Pakistan was brought into SCO by China as a condition for letting India join the SCO. And out of the 9 members of the SCO, 7 are part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which India has opposed since its launch. Only Russia is the other member that is not part of the BRI. And the fact that the SCO deliberations are conducted only in 2 languages, Mandarin and Russian, underscores the Sino-Russian shadow over the grouping.
So let me just play devil's advocate here, Brahmachalani. I mean, look, there is a certain history to the SCO. It came about as a result of people in Central Asian republics worrying a little bit about what's happening there, American interference and the like. That may have been one of the major reasons why India also went into the SCO. It was being argued that we need to play a role in the Central Asian countries, and it's better to be for India to be part of groupings like this, to try and influence them from inside, rather than quit and walk out and then have no influence at all or no say at all. So in other words, keep as many links and connections open as you possibly can in what may well be a multipolar world. That would be the contrary view to what you've been saying.
Yes, some argue that it's better to keep your enemies close. In 1971, President Lyndon Johnson famously said that he was talking about a political rival at home, that it's probably better to have him inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. But as an Arab proverb goes, it's better to have 1,000 enemies outside of the tent than one inside the tent. So it depends, where you stand on this issue. I'm not saying that India should walk out of the SCO, but I think it's important to understand, to grasp that the SCO provides no tangible benefits to India. The benefits are largely symbolic.
So Brahma, let's just take that thought forward. I mean, look, you could say that whatever happens, India's not likely to see eye to eye with China in the foreseeable future. China is going to be a malign influence in the forum in some form or the other, and probably very similar with Pakistan. That's another malign influence, certainly when it comes to India. But when it comes to some of the other countries in the SCO, India would like to get back to the sort of historic and traditional ties it has had with many of the Central Asian republics, for example. Now, there are interests that are common out there. Even when it comes to a country like Iran that has just been allowed into the SCO, we've had the Prime Minister also referring, for example, to the Chabahar port, how that could be utilized, how India can get direct access to the Central Asian republics. So those could be some of the actual Indian interests that could be advanced by being part of the SCO or by engaging people through this forum.
Well, Vikram, you're right, to a very limited extent, because SCO is a multilateral forum. It provides limited scope for bilateral engagement. But there are other forums through which India can deepen its engagement with Central Asian republics and with Iran. Iran, of course, is a very important neighbor of India. It's unfortunate that India has actually snapped its energy links with Iran because of US sanctions. And that has resulted in India being seen in Iran as an unreliable partner. So India has to mend its relations with Iran, but this cannot be done through the SCO forum. It has to be done on a bilateral basis. Similarly, deeper engagement with the Central Asian states like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, and also Turkmenistan, which is not part of the SCO, deeper engagement with them should be an Indian foreign policy priority. But then again, being part of the SCO is not going to advance your bilateral interests with these countries. You have to pursue those interests separately.
All right, Brahma Chelani, we hear you loud and clear. Pursue these interests, but pursue them bilaterally. Don't have too many hopes from an organization like the SCO, is what you seem to be saying. Thank you so much for joining me with that perspective. But let's just get another really important strategic thinker to come in on that and to see what he feels about some of the issues that Brahma was talking about. Former Indian ambassador to China, Ashok Kantha, now joining us. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. We were just hearing, there seems to be a tightrope walk that India is really, seems to be following. We've had this rapturous reception to Prime Minister Modi in the United States. There's the Quad. India is, it's talking to France right now. And at the same time, this SCO meeting has just taken place, filled with people who are anti-Western and people who have a very strong view about the West. Is this a tough tightrope walk that is being done right now?
Yeah, there is a bit of tightrope walking, no doubt about it. For one thing, as you know, it was a virtual summit. It was not an in-person summit. So instead of 2 days of meeting, we had just about 3 hours of meeting. In terms of outcome, in terms of projection, SU summit clearly is very different from how G20 summit will look like. In SU summit, as you know, we had a New Delhi Declaration, which contained fairly well-known positions. Then we had a joint statement on countering radicalization, and we had another joint statement on digital transactions. India decided to keep away from another document which has been issued. That's on SCO, Economic Strategy 2030. SCO as an organization is somewhat limited. I think this is something we need to take note of. We decided to join SCO in 2017, and I was involved in the process of negotiations leading up to that decision, fully mindful of the fact that there are certain contradictions within the organization, and what we can achieve in SCO will also be somewhat limited. Nevertheless, we decided to go ahead largely because we wanted to have this platform which brings together Central Asian republics, apart from other countries like Russia and China, and then in 2017 Pakistan joined, now Iran has joined. So it provides a good forum, it provides a good platform, but there is a deficit of strategic convergence among member countries. So we have to start with that.
Well, Ambassador Kanta, when you and other people were negotiating this and negotiating India's entry to the SCO, when the entire talk about strategic convergence, some would say that when it comes to the SCO, it's the exact opposite, because if there's one body that seems to be filled with all of India's adversaries and enemies, tactical and strategic, Pakistan and China being the obvious examples, both of them are actually present in the SCO. So when you were taking the decisions and negotiating some of this way back in 2017, was the reason partly that it's better to be part of a grouping like the SCO, even if India's adversaries are there, so that you can have some influence on what it's doing, rather than have no influence at all? Was that really the thinking, the strategic thinking?
I think there were a couple of considerations. So the most important consideration was that we attach a great deal of importance to our engagement with Central Asian republics, but we are disadvantaged there because of lack of connectivity, and our footprint to the ground is somewhat limited. So SCO provides a platform for engaging with them on an annual basis. And secondly, the factor you mentioned, it's important to be part of the tent, and also to see that we can influence outcomes of this organization.
But Ambassador Kanta, some would argue that the correct thing to do with the Central Asian republics, and with Iran for that matter, would be to develop the bilateral relations instead. Talk directly to Iran about Chabahar. You don't have to do it through a SCO meeting. Directly maintain the historic relations that India has had with the Central Asian republics. Keep those bilateral ties going instead of worrying about a multilateral organization like SCO. That would be one way of thinking.
You're absolutely right. In fact, SCO is no substitute for a bilateral engagement with Central Asian republics and with Iran. In fact, that's why in 2015, Prime Minister Modi, paid a visit to 5 Central Asian republics at the same time, which was unprecedented. So the primary mode of engagement with Central Asia will have to be through bilateral engagement, and not through instrumentality of SCO, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a somewhat limited organization.
Right. Well, Ambassador Kanta, now that we have you with us, I just wanted to get your sense of the future. What happens now when it comes to the SCO or even BRICS, which is going to be the next big meeting other than G20 that's coming up? BRICS is a much larger forum. A lot of other countries are now wanting to join. Do you think other forums are going to become really, really important? And what do you think India should do, given that not just the SCO, but even BRICS could start becoming dominated more and more by China? This entire talk, for example, about settling oil trade in Chinese yuan or building up the Chinese yuan in some form as an alternative to the dollar. Now, that could be the agenda in forums like BRICS as well. How do you think India should play this, given that I'm sure India is not going to be entirely comfortable having the dollar being replaced by the Chinese yuan as a dominant currency? I'm sure that is something that would be worrying India a little bit, because the last thing that India should probably want is for the yuan to become some sort of a default currency in settling anything.
I don't think there's any real risk of yuan, replacing US dollar as the reserve currency or the primary currency for international trade. China, being the largest trading nation in the world, does play an important role in international commerce, and they are trying to position yuan as international currency. But there are a whole lot of problems there. In this SEO summit, uh, this point was made that when it comes to trade between Russia and China, for instance, 80% of trade is being denominated either in rubles or in renminbi. But that's also because sanctions imposed by the Western countries and the lack of access to trade in US dollar. So this is going to be a process. Clearly, will not be inclined to see that renminbi replaces US dollar, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. There are a whole lot of problems, including the fact that China maintains restrictions on capital account when it comes to renminbi as an international currency.
Ambassador Kanta, thank you so much for joining us, and we will, of course, keep talking to you in the build-up to the BRICS summit and also, of course, to G20. Thank you so much to get that sense from you. And now let's turn our attention to the stock markets, where there may have been some profit booking on Friday, but by and large it's been a blockbuster rally over the last few weeks for Indian stock markets, which has catapulted both the Nifty and the Sensex to lifetime highs again and again this week alone. Now, this surge has been driven by a number of factors, including rising corporate earnings, better than expected GDP growth numbers, the easing of inflationary pressures, and the possibility that we could be approaching the end of the cycle of rising interest rates. And also, finally, and perhaps most importantly, the return of foreign investor flows in a massive way. Since April alone, as a result of all of this, the stock market has rallied more than 8%. Q4 earnings have been strong and have been pointing towards continued demand traction. However, it's been the small and mid-cap indices that have been outperforming the large caps in the last couple of days. Another factor, of course, that has been contributing to the rally is the fact that the US dollar has been weakening against other currencies, which has made Indian stocks more attractive to foreign investors. Domestic flows are also continuing and are looking quite solid. Now, amid all this optimism and the scaling of new peaks by the markets, there are concerns and reasons enough to remain somewhat cautious, whether it's the possible of a resurgence of inflation which could be coming, a slowdown in growth, or even geopolitical risk. What's going to happen with Ukraine and other such issues? What's going to happen to oil? So, is this the peak, or is there a lot more to come? There are many who may have missed out on this rally and are now feeling a strong sense of FOMO. What is the advice for them? Joining us to discuss this and a lot more, two of the leading market experts right now, market veteran Samir Arora and Feroz Aziz, who's the Deputy CEO of Anand Rathi Wealth Management, both of them joining us on this program. Samir, let me start with you first, because you've been, monitoring trends and driving the markets for, 29, 30 years right now. So, Samir, tell us, sometimes when you're hitting these all-time peaks in the market, there is a sense of nervousness. What has happened? Has it risen too fast? Is it all going to go sour? Is that the sort of nervousness that you would be feeling right now? Or do you think, hey, this is just a start? There's a long, sustained bull market ahead, so don't worry about it right now. What would you be feeling?
Well, sometimes they may make you nervous, but this time definitely not. Because if you see what is the return for this calendar year, it's like less than 7-8% in 6 months. If you see what was the return last year in rupee terms, it was like 4-5%. So this high has come because you basically crossed a number of about a year and a half ago. And these returns for the past 2 years are way below our normal annualized returns of our market, which would be in the mid-teen range of 13-15% per annum. You look at any longer-term period. So I would say it's better to call it just one small step and more of what may happen in future in terms of FII interest plus domestic money and so on and so forth.
Right, Samir, you make a good point. You're saying that what is happening right now is not irrational exuberance in any sense, because Forget about the last 6-7 months. Even if you take a look at the last 4 or 5 years, it's not as though the markets have been rising in a crazy manner even for 4 or 5 years. Is that the point you're making? This is not irrational exuberance right now.
So past 5-year returns are in the range of 13.5%, 14%, depending on which index you use. And these are the longer term returns from our market going back 10 years, 20 years, 25 years. Broadly, they all end up in mid-teen numbers. And so the past 5 years are also in that range. And last 2 years have been below this. So therefore, today or yesterday crossing all-time high is, actually in theory, every day should be all-time high if the markets were smooth, like a fixed deposit where every day interest is accruing and therefore it is higher than day before. In markets, because these things don't happen evenly, you call them that, oh, it's a high, but it should be in theory every day. And it's not out of line with its history.
So you're saying if you're looking at historic returns, this is not irrational exuberance, but what about valuations? When you take a look at valuations of the Indian market, and especially if you compare them with the rest of the emerging markets, India is trading at a significant premium to the others.
India historically has traded in the 40% type range. And today you may say it's 45, 47% range. But one reason for that is not that India has gone up too much, because as we just said, last 2 years, it has gone up cumulatively maybe 10% or 12%, is because the Chinese market has got crushed a lot. And therefore, our premium to China looks high. I mean, China is a big part, 1/3 of the emerging market. And therefore, if Chinese market falls, it looks as if the rest of the world is doing something wild, whereas it has more to do with China doing badly. If we say that last 2 years, our market is up 4% and now maybe 7-8% this year, in half a year. So in 18 months, we are up 10%, which is definitely 12%, which is definitely below our earnings growth over this period. And therefore, it's not our fault if we are trading at a small premium. That is to do with valid reasons in China, where the markets have been disappointed and the policies have been such that they have hurt investors, and therefore investors are upset. And that is one more reason to be positive on India, that in the past we have done these numbers without having any tailwinds of people actively seeking us, at least within emerging markets. And now there is a valid case for them doing so.
So if you look ahead now, if you're a small investor watching this program and saying, what should I do right now? Should I get in or not? What would you tell them? That, look, people are saying there are going to be tailwinds. The Indian economy is doing well. If the economy is growing at 5%, 6%, 7%, then getting equity returns of 12 or 13%, going forward, may well be, it's not unusual or unrealistic.
So first thing is that if you look at past any broad period, it's in this range. Now, why this number is fair and not unreasonable to expect going forward? First is that the 6-7% GDP is in dollar terms. So that means in nominal terms, the GDP itself is growing 11-12%. And therefore, India is growing 11-12%. And therefore, corporate earnings growing 1 or 2% higher. 13-14% is not unreasonable because the corporate sector is a little better than the overall economy. Secondly, if we look at the earnings of most of the market, which means if you look at big picture, the earnings in general for financials, for consumer, for IT, broadly, it has always been as a group within a mid-teen kind of range. And then some companies grow a little more and some little less. And the third is if you look at equity risk premium, which means how much do equity markets deliver over and above the fixed income government bond of the same market.
But Samir, if I can interrupt you, there could be one other major factor this time around, which are the Indian retail investors who've often missed out on rallies in some form or the other. Even today, if you look at the amount of exposure that Indian retail investors have to the stock market, it's what, 4%, 5% or thereabouts of their total assets. It's 50% in real estate. Now that SIP money is starting to come up, and that money which is going to be coming from retail investors into the stock markets is something, are inflows that could actually keep the markets buoyant for a while.
So SIP is already at around 14,000 a month, slightly less than 2 billion a month. So that is $24 billion, the domestic guy, because there's no really net anything else. SIP is the net flow. Rest is inflow, outflow. So you're getting about $20 odd billion a year in mutual funds.
Right, Samir. So you'll obviously make more money if you're buying the right stocks, buying the right sector. So when it comes to getting the asset allocation correct, what's your view? Large cap, small cap? Should you be buying IT, not buying IT? Where do you think people should be investing their money?
So on that, generally, like we in the past have added about 6-7% per annum over the index in the last 18 years that we've been at Helios. But the allocation, we are basically, even though we are an offshore fund, basically treating it like a flexi cap fund. And in a flexi cap fund, which is more or less representative of the market, the large caps are about, I think, 68-70%, and mid and small are 30%. So at the first level, for somebody new, this is the range. If somebody is aggressive, they may have a little bit more in mid and small. But generally, 70-30 is what the market is.
All right, Samir, in a nutshell, what you seem to be saying is just sit tight, hang in there. It's going to be a long ride, so enjoy it. Thanks a lot for joining us. Let me get one more view on that from Feroz Aziz, who's now also with us. Feroz, right now, markets at an all-time high. Is there a smile on all of your clients' face?
Yes, Vikram, sir. Of course, markets are at all-time high. That generally creates positive hormones in an investor's body, so they're happy. I think having the right asset allocation has been the key. So 60-70% of long-term monies have always been in equity for our clients, so they are happy. But coming to markets, when they have reached where they have reached, if you look at the corporate earnings, have been phenomenal. And I think quite a few people, when they have an opinion on the market, they don't look at the scoreboard as intently and minutely. So if you look at the corporate earnings, 936, which is the Nifty earnings expected, if you ask me, and looking at all the top 50, all the 50 constituents of Nifty, in my belief, 936 should be overachieved this year.
So if I can just pause you for a minute to try and sort of decipher this for retail investors and others watching this, what you're essentially saying is that, yes, the markets have risen a lot, which is great, but you're also saying that corporate earnings have also risen sharply in the last 3 years, from 538 to 936, and so therefore it's not necessarily a bubble that is taking place. It is being backed by a sustained growth in earnings that we've seen in the last few years. Would that be a fair way of summarizing what you've said?
Fair and a far more clearer way, let me put it like that. And also, if you look at the P of Nifty 2 years back, when Nifties were at 14,000 post-COVID, are identical to the earnings P today. But Nifty is at 19,500. That's because the pace at which Nifty has risen, earnings have also risen the same amount. So valuation has not gone up, price has gone up, because price has some correlation to what earnings happen. And Vikram, so if I have to take it to the next variable, if you look at from the fiscal prudence standpoint, I think that's really worked for the markets.
So is it your view then, Feroz, that this sort of a growth could continue for the next 3 or 4 years? If you're having 12-13% equity returns, 14% equity returns, then you're essentially looking at a position where the Nifty could double within 6 years or 7 years.
Yes, absolutely. In 6-7 years, Nifty can double. But what happens is, if this kind of consistent 5-year earnings growth comes, then there is generally a PE expansion. We have also looked at a forward PE in the past of 29-30. Okay, we are not at that range. Of course, it is outrageous to be at that range, and we would actually be speaking more negative at that point in time. But 20 is not something which will sustain. It will go to 22-23 if this were to come true, because then you have both the things working for you, the earnings growth and the expansion as well.
All right, Feroz, lots of good advice from both you and Samir for people who are watching the Indian stock market closely. Thanks a lot for joining us with that. And let's now turn to our newsmaker of the week. Indian football has experienced a remarkable surge in recent times with consecutive triumphs in the Intercontinental Cup and the SAF Championship. The Indian national football team has showcased their potential by defeating formidable opponents like Lebanon and Kuwait. The Blue Tigers, as they are fondly called, have sparked renewed interest and enthusiasm among fans, igniting a passion for the sport that had been somewhat dormant for a while. At the forefront of this incredible journey is the inspirational captain Sunil Chhetri, who not only leads by example on the field but has also galvanized a new generation of talented young players. As the team's captain, Chhetri's experience, skill and unwavering dedication have been instrumental in really guiding that team towards glory. And it's such a pleasure now to be joined on the India story by the captain of the Indian football team, arguably the greatest footballer India has ever produced, one of the top goal scorers in the world, Sunil Chhetri. Sunil, first of all, many, many congratulations from all of us. It must have been a somewhat nerve-wracking, tense moment in that penalty shootout, but many congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yes, it was, and tiring also. 3 days prior to yesterday's final, we had a semi-final, which also went 120 and penalties. So yes, there were some tired legs. Sadly, we also had few injuries. But at the end of the day, when you get the trophy, everything feels sweeter.
All right, so Sunil, you've now won the SAF Championship. What's your next target? What are your aims and goals for the team and for yourself looking ahead from now?
I think the most important tournament is the Asia Cup, which is January 2024. We already have a group, which is a very tough one. To the build-up of that tournament, it is very important that we do well. In the last, I think, 6 months, we have done really well. But the reality is where we want to reach is far away. We have to keep our head down and keep going. And I'm not trying to sound cliche, but slowly and steadily, we're making progress. But trust me, where we want to reach, the things are going to be really difficult. So it's important that we keep doing well, keep our head on our shoulder and see where we can reach. The whole goal is to reach there as soon as possible. Be in the first 10 of Asia, be there, rub shoulders with the best ones, and see how far you are. Because once we do that, trust me, people will stop asking me, when are we going to play World Cup?
Yeah, you must be tired of people by now asking you that question, that when is India going to be playing at the World Cup? But how do you get there? As you said, you've got to first be in the top 10 in Asia, and then you've got to be in the top 5 in Asia, and that's when you qualify and India gets to be in the World Cup. So what is your agenda? How do you actually achieve that? How do you get to be in the top 10 and then the top 5 in Asia?
So, as I said, we are doing really well in the last 1.5, 2 years. Something great is happening in the team. A lot of young ones are getting matured and they're doing really well. We've done really well in terms of our technique, tactics, and also the physical attributes. So slowly and steadily, I think now a lot of countries are taking notice as to what we are doing. Yesterday only, to just give you an example, SAF Cup generally is just for the SAF region. This year, just because we wanted more preparation, we invited Lebanon and Kuwait, who are the Arab teams and who are, without demeaning the SAF region, are better than us. And it showed because both the teams were in semi-final and finals. And to overcome that challenge was a great victory in itself. It wasn't huge, but it was important. So I think slowly and steadily, once we reach in the first 10, 12, we'll keep rubbing our shoulders against the mighty Asian countries, and then everyone will know how far we are. The boys, us players, will understand how far we are, how much we have to improve.
Right, Sunil, but of course, one of the things that we keep discussing as you are taking Indian football forward is the entire question of, the dominance of cricket, and how do you get young people to say, I actually want to be playing football instead of just playing cricket or doing anything else. Now, the fact that there's a Super League now and other leagues are coming up, and therefore people can perhaps expect to get good money also from playing football. Is that something that you think could also start to signal a change?
Yeah, but before that, I'll answer your first part. How many kids do you know who take cricket or football or tennis or table tennis because they think about the career or the prospect or the ranking when they are 4, 5, 6? Kids do not take sports because they think they're going to be the next Tendulkar or next Chhetri or next Virat Kohli or next Lender Pace. They play because they enjoy it. It's as simple as that. We have to be a sporting nation. The only problem that our country, a slight problem, is when he or she is good, identifying the talent at the right time, Nurturing them and giving them the right infrastructure and the knowledge and the education is our problem. In that context, cricket has done well. And because we are 1.4 billion people, there is no doubt in my mind that we can do well in all other sports. There is no competition. When Virat does well, I'm really happy. I'm pretty sure when I do well, he's happy. At the end of the day, the advantage that countries like America, China have, which is population, choose from bigger pool. That's what we have. So we have to make sure that we become a sporting nation and make our pool bigger. There is no competition between different sports.
But of course, one of the biggest advantages that you have in a sport like football is that all you need is to just have a football. So it's very easy to get a lot of people to go out there and start playing football in the fields, like you see in Africa or Latin America, or so many parts of the world. All you need is a football, so it's not that tough to get 4-year and 5-year-olds to really go out and start playing.
The interest was always there, you know. All these kids that you're talking about are awake 1:30 a.m. at night watching La Liga, Premier League, Champions League, World Cup. To understand and to like football is the easiest thing. That's why it's the most popular game in the world and in our country also. It's just the link between, okay, fine, I love the sport. How do I go about being a professional in my own country is where we are lacking. Once we bridge that gap, I mean, there is no looking back. At least then we can say, you know what, whatever team we have, this is the best we can do. But right now, the gap is somewhere where we are missing. But to consume football is the most easiest thing. Everyone watches football. No matter who you are, no matter where you are in the world, you watch football. It's just that domestic football hasn't got that eyeball and the interest yet. And slowly it is changing. Yes, ISL has done a great job. Yes, everyone, all the stakeholders coming in and making sure that we work hard is going to make a lot of difference. But trust me, the interest part was never a problem. People always want to watch football because it's the best game in the world.
I can tell you from the rest of us, it's a matter of great national pride to have an Indian football player who's up there being spoken about when it comes to international goals in the same league as Messi and Ronaldo. It is absolutely a matter of great pride for all of us. So what are your targets on that front? Where do you see yourself ending?
Well, as I said, I never thought I'm going to score 92 goals for my country. I never thought that I'm going to captain it. Now that I'm in this position, whichever game, whenever I play for my country, I give whatever I have. You can never guarantee goals. You can never guarantee success. You can never guarantee wins. What you can do is just go and give whatever you have. Slowly, the tides are changing. We are doing well. The team is cementing its place in terms of where we are in Asia. So, yeah, I mean, fingers crossed. Just keep working hard. See where we reach.
All right, Sunil Chhetri, thank you so much for joining us and all the best with all your endeavors. We're all rooting for you. Thank you so much for being with us. And that's all we have for you on this episode of the India Story. But do join us again next week as we once again bring you a wrap of all the big stories from India and all the big newsmakers as well. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.